Some people on your comment section will say to you, "Oh, Stefan, you should go into politics. You're exactly the kind of person who should be representing Poland in some form." Would you ever think of doing that?
I've been asked this question many times.
Hello and welcome to Heart of Poland. Today we're going to speak to a content creator who I am super interested in finding out about his life in Poland, his love for Poland and all the things he's been doing for Poland. We're going to speak to content creator Stefan Tompson. Hello Stefan, welcome to the studio.
Hi Patrick, thanks for having me.
Now, I have to immediately ask, are you okay? What happened to your leg?
Had a bit of a horse tumble in Cuba, but it was a fairly basic flesh wound. It's, you know, absolutely fine, and the horse was fine as well. So.
The horse was fine. Okay, good. And you're going to be all right. You're not going to have a. You're not
I'll be okay. Sorry, obviously, to everyone for being, you know, having a sort of bloodied bandage on my leg. I hope it doesn't impact the conversation. But
I hope not. Your tongue and mouth works, as far as I know. Well, it's also very hot here, so actually you're probably in the right clothes for these conditions. Because, dear viewers, we have returned to our fantastic studio in the heart of Warsaw's East Bank. Stefan, are you a filmmaker, journalist, content creator, YouTuber?
Yeah, I'd say reluctantly that I am probably a YouTuber and a content creator and a filmmaker in a sense, because I have made finally a proper full-length documentary film. So I think finally I could call myself a filmmaker, which sounds quite serious, but
what's the most popular or most watched film you've done?
The most watched film I've done is probably an English language short about the Warsaw Uprising. I think that had in the millions of views. There's a sort of very emotional, very personal video about what the Warsaw Uprising was in a sort of moral sense, not as a sort of military feat, but as a display of Polishness. And that I think it touched a nerve with a lot of people, and I think it's a very difficult thing to capture. And I think the reactions I got from Polish people to that was this feeling of finally this has been explained in terms that foreigners can understand. Right. So that was yeah.
What about film that you're least proud of stuff? I always ask these.
The film that I am least proud of, I've done a series of. My brother and I traveled a lot around Europe at the time of the migration crisis. We covered the migration crisis. We did some fairly basic and low-level videos about migration. And I think some of them, in a sense, looking back at them, we were quite keen to prove something. And we went out, and we didn't pretend to be journalists. So I don't feel any guilt from that perspective. But I think that I was very young at the time. I was about 21, 22. And I think that it lacked the depth that it should have had. And looking back, I slightly cringe.
Yeah, I think it's like the filmmaker arc, is if you have to have something you're cringing about to be going in the right direction. Well, let's talk immediately, like what are you excited? Is there a project you can tell us about that's coming down the wings?
Yes. So the full-length documentary film that I've made, that's coming out very appropriately on the 17th of September, so the date of the invasion of the Soviets on Poland, is a film about the destruction of private property and entrepreneurship in Poland, going from 1944 to 1989. And I think it's a topic that's been completely it hasn't been covered. It hasn't been covered by the Poles. I don't think that as a nation we've actually analyzed communism from that angle of its destruction of private property and of entrepreneurship and what it's done to people in the entrepreneurial sense and of their attitude towards private property, which is absolutely crucial to a well-functioning liberal democracy. You can't have a democracy without ownership rights and without entrepreneurship. This is the backbone of an economy. And this film, I'm very satisfied with what we've done. We went from 1944 to via the Sovietization of the Polish economy, the destruction of a caste of people, so the aristocrats and the szlachta and the landowners, the gentry, and the destruction of small businesses and the destruction of large businesses, so the nationalization of industry, all the way to the sort of the pain and sort of putting down of entrepreneurs in a very sort of mean and small way, which I think characterizes the communists quite well. And I think this film, I hope, will be a sort of the start to a conversation about entrepreneurship and about ownership rights and about what communism has done to that very niche aspect of the Polish. I mean, it's not a niche aspect of the Polish economy, but it's a niche topic in and of itself.
It is, because, you know, war is, so forgive me for saying this, but it's sexy, it's controversial, it's dramatic, it has the best and worst of human behaviour. Do you want to go in this direction of making kind of more, maybe slightly more obscure or less prima facie interesting documentaries? Do you want to move away from topics around war?
Yes, I mean the topic of war, it's a fascinating thing, but it's an incredibly draining. If you look at it, I mean I can't help but take it very personally, and I get very involved, and I've met a lot of war veterans. I've met prisoners of concentration camps, and I've met people who were repressed by the communists in the 1940s and 50s, and it really it's a very, very draining. If you really live it and understand it and empathize, and I think I'm quite an empathetic person, it's very difficult to not get emotionally attacked. And also, I mean, another aspect of what I've done is I have filmed a lot of war veterans. I've really taken some of their deaths quite really very, very personal. I mean, some of them became my friends. So it's a very draining thing. I'm actually quite drained by the topic.
Yeah.
I think Poland is quite drained by the topic.
We're going to enter into a conversation here because we wanted to do this today. I feel the same way. It gets under your skin because you're reading original source material in order to be able to create something, you know, condensed, let's say, from a series of topics. The Warsaw Uprising one is a good example. You're meeting with people. Do you sometimes feel like it's a negative energy for you, or does it spurs you on to something greater? Because your body language, and you said that, Stefan, it changed a little bit there. So you can see it's been a tiring time.
I mean, it does. I think what happens is you know, as a Polish person, you sort of you read about the horrors inflicted by the Germans, and you read about the horrors inflicted by the Russians. It also, I mean, it impacts your day-to-day life, in the sense of you sort of, or the Ukrainians. I was very fascinated by the genocide in Volhynia. And that, you know, it ends up, these things from the past end up creeping into and obviously you have to understand them and you have to take out consequences, you have to learn from these things. But it does, I think to a lot of people, these ancient conflicts, I mean, you know, we're talking 3 generations ago, you know, 80 years has passed since the start of the war. This is a long time. And still it's also raw and it's also so personal. So I think what I have to say about war, I think I've said. And I think I would like to move on to other things. I think it's very, very important. The problem with being stuck with this topic is you end up being stuck with something that's in the past, and you're stuck in the past. And you're not really moving forward. And this is why I'm here. This is why I'm in this country, because I'm very excited about where this country is going. I'm very excited about this energy, this vitality, I mean, watching the transition it's a fascinating. It's all going so fast. So you look at London, and there's that glass ceiling there, and the elites are sort of entrenched, and there's an establishment, and there's a lot of doors everywhere, and they're quite difficult to get through. Whereas in Poland, these doors, they're being formed as we speak, you know. So I think it's a really exciting time. And I think that's also, it's very important, apart from commemorating these things and defending the historical truth and obviously admiring the values and the strength of character and the perseverance of the Polish people, which are incredible things and beautiful things and things that I deeply admire and things that I look up to and things that I try to be inspired by and sort of, I think it's a code that you can live by. But ultimately the really important thing is to provide people with something else, and that is it's a direction. It's sort of the idea that, you know, we can make this place a better place, and there are many things apart from the war that I think that things that have been impacted because things that are reality in Poland because of 50 years of brutal communism, and I think, you know, having that Western experience and having grown up in a place that hasn't, you know, the last time England was invaded was 1066. You're talking about almost 1,000 years of effectively, you know, being uninvaded. And that forges a certain mentality. And I think there's a lot of great things that we can bring from the UK and bring them here and implement them in Poland. And that's something I'm very excited about. And I think that's something that is a lot more, in a sense, there's a lot more positivity in that than in talking about war and death and misery and yeah.
Some people on your comment section will say to you, "Oh, Stefan, you should go into politics. You're exactly the kind of person who should be representing Poland in some form." Would you ever think of doing that?
I've been asked this question many times. I think it's not something I'm interested in doing now. I've thought about it. I've been offered places on various lists of various political parties. I thought about it. I considered it, and I don't believe that I have anything sufficient to offer to warrant being an elected official. And for that reason, I wouldn't run and I wouldn't stand as a candidate, because I don't think I think I'm too young. I think I'm too inexperienced. I think I don't have sufficient business experience, and I don't want to be sort of another elected bureaucrat just spouting truisms. It's not something that interests me. I think it's something that lacks, and I think that's probably, I mean, it's a problem of politics everywhere, but it's not. It's a bit like to be a politician is a bit like being a doctor. It should be a calling, and I think perhaps one day, but definitely not. Certainly not now.
When you look back at the last 5 years of content creation about Poland, do you feel like the work you've done has had an impact, a measurable impact? Is this something you're going to be proud of?
I think it's had a measurable impact on my life. I think it's made me, spending time reflecting on things has certainly made me grow as a person. And that's something I'm very grateful for. And that sense of wanting to share something of me. Has it had a measurable impact on people? I've had hundreds of very nice, often moving messages. Is that a measurable impact? I don't. It's a measurable impact on certainly on a few individuals, and I hope that. I mean, what I really hoped when I started doing, to be entirely honest with you, when I started making videos, I thought to myself, you know, how many Poles have made it to the UK? Officially 965,000. I think that was the official statistic a few years ago. I mean, to me, it was sort of, Poland it's my home. It means more than my home. It's not something that I can quite put into words, but it's something that's incredibly important to me. And I believe deeply that, Poland has this quite infectious patriotism. I mean, you're certainly a victim of that sort of infection. But what I hoped for was that, if I showed that it was possible to grab a camera and share something and just tell a story and share that with the world, I was sort of thinking, there's all these Poles in the UK, there's all these Poles in France and Germany and all these places. All it takes is for a few people to sort of pick up their cameras and do it in French and in Italian and German. And that's sort of what I hoped for, and that didn't happen. So from that sense, I mean, that would have been a measurable impact, having a few content creators reach out and say, you made this video, as a reaction, I've decided, I'm going to do the same thing in France, I'm going to do the same thing in Italy, I'm going to do the same thing, here and here. And that didn't happen. So in that sense, but as I said, it's had a measurable impact on me, and I think there's certain things that I've really reflected upon, and I think that I've really grown from it as an individual and as a person.
We were kind of joking about your leg injury, but I know it was quite a traumatic experience for you. You were stuck in a third world country, quite literally a socialist country, and quite unpleasant, I think, those few days.
Fairly.
How have you changed the person since that injury?
It's a very interesting thing. I think being a young man, I think it's certainly a male syndrome. You're so convinced. I mean, you don't really think about, even though I've been surrounded by old people for many years, you don't think it's something that will affect you. And there's a very weird sense of, as this horse tripped and fell on my leg in the middle of the road, it was in the middle of nowhere in Cuba, between Trinidad and Cienfuegos. And these are two fairly small Cuban towns. And I'm lying there, and there's this fairly big gaping wound. I can see my bone. And I'm lying on the street thinking, this is really not great.
It's a family show, by the way, Stefan. So everyone says.
But anyway, several hours later, I finally made it to this hospital. I've been patched up with insufficient anesthesia. It was incredibly painful, but I sort of, I consider myself a manly man. So I sort of, manned up and sort of stiff upper lip and sort of clenched my fists and thought, I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to shout. I'm going to be a man. And there was this curious group of Cubans who followed me around and sort of watched the entire process in hospital. So you've got an audience as well. So you sort of feel you have to be manly. I mean, this is not the moment to cry. And my brother was there with a camera, and some of it was on film. So obviously, trying to be. But eventually, as I was left by myself, I mean, this was multiple hours after. I mean, from the moment of the accident, I mean, I was lying on the road for about half an hour. Then there was about an hour and a half ride to the hospital, and then in hospital before finally the surgeon saw me, it'd been another 2 hours, and it was a 45-minute session of sewing up my leg. And finally, I was left alone, and I just broke down and cried. I cried like a little child. And I hadn't cried in a long time, and I sat there in this hospital, and I was incredibly tired and in pain, and this adrenaline had run out, and I sort of. It took me a few days. I had many days of lying in bed not being able to move. So I had a lot of time to think. And I was thinking to myself, why was it that I wasn't in pain? I wasn't crying because of sadness. I wasn't crying. It was it was quite cathartic, actually. And it sort of came to me. It was this moment of realization that, life is such a finite thing, and it's such a fragile thing. And in fact, I'm bloody lucky to be alive. I mean, all it was a little flesh wound in the end. Objectively, it could have been way worse. But this sense of it can all go so easily, and the sense of kind of letting go of the idea that youth is eternal. And I think it really shook me quite hard. So it actually was very motivating in that sense of thinking, I could be gone any day. I might as well, I've got to do more.
So was there a moment when you thought, am I going to make it through? Am I going to survive this?
No, it wasn't. I mean, there was no moment where I thought, there was a moment where I objectively thought, there were 2-3 days where I thought I might lose my leg. Gangrene is it's an actual threat. And on the 4th day after the accident, I was lying in bed, and my leg had ballooned up, and I had 40 degrees of fever. At that point, I thought, ooh, this might be that mythical gangrene they keep talking about. I just rushed off to hospital again to see some doctors, and they sort of patched me up and cleaned it up again, and injected me with some whatever, I can't remember what it was. Stuff, I don't quite know. I mean, I didn't inquire. I was just, please just fix this. But it was quite it's a scary thing. I mean, the realization of how incredibly fragile we are. It's again, this is something you empathize with, because you had exactly that when you came to Poland, of having that your head sort of, beaten in, I suppose.
There was no gangrene in that case. Have you always been such a wise head on young shoulders, Stefan? Because you don't talk like the average 26-year-old British male. I mean, certainly, I was raised by a very Catholic mother, which I think this is one of these things. There's youth has a tendency. I think no generation is unique in the sense every generation thinks it rebels against a series of things, and I quite early on in life I accepted that there was a lot of knowledge in old things. In ancient things. I mean, take the Bible, for example, and certainly a lot of knowledge and value and things one can learn from tradition and from history, and that things are innately learned over a great amount of time. So that's something I accepted quite early on. And the reason I accepted that was, I went to a private school. It was a French school, and when Poland joined the European Union in 2004, there was a huge amount of Polish migrants, and a lot of my friends ended up getting Polish cleaners and Polish cooks and Polish nannies. And suddenly this Polish element of me, which had been, I suppose, in a sense, fairly insignificant. I mean, we spoke Polish at home, and we spoke Polish with my mother. I have an English surname, and so this Polish element, it wasn't ever so, it wasn't. And suddenly after that happened, it became quite a noticeable thing, and I sort of started being teased at school about being poor. It's quite an amusing thing to be teased. I mean,
And I sort of slightly mocked for Poland this, this sort of second-rate place, and you come from the second-rate place. And I'm very glad that I didn't give in to the peer pressure of thinking, oh God, I am from a second-rate place. This is dreadful. I sort of thought to myself, well, you can't really knock something you don't know. And that actually sparked a huge interest in Poland. And this realization of things to be learnt from people who are older and wiser. And I spent a lot of time with family members who were in the Home Army and who were involved in the Polish emigre life in the UK. And so there was a huge amount of knowledge and value that was transmitted both from the Catholic faith, which I think, even if you looked at it from an atheistic or agnostic standpoint, you're talking about an institution that's 2,000 years old. There's not many things last that long, and if something has stood for such a long amount of time and is still so influential and still has such a huge role in people's life, clearly there is value to be drawn from that. And it's the same with these Polish patriots that I met. The idea that these people were willing to risk their lives and give up their youth, give up their strength, give up their energy, their vitality, everything for this concept of Poland clearly meant that there is great value in Poland. And that's something I think I understood quite early on. But that doesn't mean, I've had lots of, silly beliefs and sort of...
Because what I'm thinking here, Stefan, is basically like, I'm sure people watch this go, he's 26. He talks like a 50-year-old guy. There's something that's
very sweet of you, Patrick.
Well, depending on your point of view, it could be a bad thing. But some people watching this will say, right, he sounds very serious. Okay, let's talk about this. Where's the fun side in Stefan?
Where's the fun side?
What helps you relax?
No, I have a fun side. I horse ride.
I know you have a fun side. You won't be doing very much of that anymore.
No, there's definitely an adventurous side to me. There's a very curious side. I enjoy music. I play the guitar.
I've heard reports.
I enjoy dancing. I enjoy a good party. I have a very keen interest in cigars. Actually, that's quite an old person thing to be interested in, I suppose. No, but I enjoy a good party, and there is definitely
because Adam Zamoyski, when he came on here,
yes.
Said he belongs in the 19th century. I wonder, does Stefan Tompson belong in the 20th century?
Do I belong in the 20th century? I don't like to think of time in that way. I think I'm in the right place at the right time. I think I am where I should be, and I wouldn't want to have a feeling of being in the wrong place. I don't think that's the right attitude to have. I think the more important way of looking at it is of thinking, there are certain values and things that I appreciate from certain time periods, or and bringing that into my reality. I think that's more important to me. Certainly, I would. Again, this is something that we've talked a lot, outside of cameras, and one of the things we've talked a lot about. A lot of it revolves around this sort of political world, and I think certainly, my broad interest does lie in I am a conservative in the classical sense of the word, and it's a great and not in the political sense, but in the classical sense of the word, of wanting to conserve and of wanting to bring through values and traditions and things that we have built and learnt and acquired over time, and bringing that into the present and conserving it and preserving it for future generations. This is the thing, is you think, Adam Zamoyski saying, oh, I belong in the 19th century, and then, if you were in the 19th century, you'd probably say, oh, I belong in the 18th. And I think it's very easy to get drawn by the past. I think it's more important to focus on making of bettering the present, and of making the present as pleasant as possible for everyone. And if you make it pleasant for yourself, if you avoid various pitfalls that surround you, I think if an individual ends up in their own sort of private little hell, and if there's enough people who end up in their private little hells, society becomes hell. So this is what I'm very focused on, is of and that's something I would like to, that's going back to content creation, and that is something I'm very interested in, and of bringing forth these valuable things from conservatism. And I think, the Polish spirit, and you could disagree with me on this, and you probably will disagree with me on this, Polishness in great many ways is conservatism. It's the love of country, the love of God, the love of honor, and it's a sense of transmitting, in this case, you know, a piece of land, which is obviously, it's more than just a piece of land, because it's values, it's a, this is the thing, it's very difficult to capture in words. I'm struggling to, but you see what I mean, right?
You're putting it beautifully, so I'm enjoying listening to you. Okay, we haven't got very long, Stefan. What one thing do people not understand about being you, being a filmmaker?
You don't understand how much work it is. People don't realize. People see a 5-minute video and think, oh, you know, take him whatever, take him 5 minutes. It's not like that. I mean, even here, I mean, we're sitting here, and you know, people are going to watch this are going to think, oh, you know, they just sat down and they turned some lights on and off they went. When actually, no. I mean, it's 3 cameras, it's 6 lights, it's a studio, it's you know, even these chairs, you have to bring them from somewhere. You know, that's something that people don't understand. And I think the other thing they don't understand is I get quite frustrated about this, and I think that's one of the things in Poland I am frustrated about, and you get this as well, is you'll have people sort of tell you, oh, I've got a great idea for you. You've got to make this video. And you think, yeah, you know, it's a great idea, it's a great topic, but it's the sense of you should do it. And in fact, what I would like, you know, this is something I'd like to transmit to people, is I don't have a background in filmmaking. I think objectively my videos are getting better and better, and visually I think I'm almost at a place where I'm fairly satisfied, I'd say. But the point is anyone can grab a camera. You know, you can grab your phone and make a great video, and you can push a message and you can tell a story, and it's supremely doable. And it's one of the great beauties of the 20th century and of technology. It's that it is so doable. But doing it well will require time, and it will require effort, and it will require a lot of thought. And I get frustrated with people who look at the things I make and they think, it took you whatever. And then you say, no, actually, this was X amount of hours, and they don't really believe you. You know? I'm sure you've had that as well.
But I've had that more than once. Stefan, you've been a captivating guest, and I'm left thinking that you're perhaps just about to pivot onto something bigger and greater, and that, frankly speaking, Poland needs to keep its eyes on you, because clearly you have a lot more to offer Poland.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for joining me. You can check out some of the other fascinating conversations with fascinating people leading fascinating lives in the fascinating country of Poland on the First News channel, wherever you consume it. And we've already talked about Adam Zamoyski, one of Poland's most famous English language historians. We've got plenty of other discussions with very interesting people like Stefan, like Adam on that channel. So I'll see you again for the next episode of Heart of Poland.